So, hello everybody, I'm Christopher Walker. Today we're going to be looking at the Cambridge English Advanced exam and the writing paper. Now this is slightly different from previous years. In 2015 Cambridge made a lot of changes to their exams and the writing was no exception to that. So let's take a look at how things have changed. And the first thing to note about the paper is that the writing paper has changed quite a bit so that it reflects this increased importance of academic English. The CAE is a recognised qualification for a lot of students who want to go and study in English-speaking countries. And obviously, if you're going to university, universities want to know if you can write in an academic style. We'll see what that means a little bit later. In terms of timing, you've got an hour and a half and you have to complete 2 pieces of writing, but unlike years gone by, you now have 2 tasks that are the same length. So the first and the second piece of writing need to be between 220 to 260 words each. So let's have a look first of all at what the examiners themselves are going to be looking at. What is it that they want from you? Well, the way that you're assessed isn't dependent on the task itself. The language grade that you get for every piece of writing will be the same, regardless of whether it's a letter or a report or anything else. So what you need to think about first of all is the content, and everything that you write needs to be relevant to the task. Think about how the target reader is going to react when they read the piece of writing that you've produced. And when I say that it has to be relevant, what I mean here is that you'll be given pretty specific instructions in the exam as to what you should be writing about. And even if you think of something else that's a bit more interesting, if you don't address the question itself, you won't have written a very good piece of writing, so your content mark will be quite low. This is an area where people, if they just stick to the task, you'll get pretty good marks. The next thing we need to consider is what we call communicative achievement. And here, when you're writing, you can ask yourself the simple questions like, have you actually used the format of the task to really communicate your message? For example, as we'll see later, when you write a report or a proposal, you can use headings. That's part of the style of that format. But if you write a report in the style of a letter or an article, you're not making best use of the format, and so your communicative achievement score is going to be a bit lower. Think also about the ideas that you introduce. Don't keep to the simple ideas and express them in simple language. Think about more complex ideas. And as much as you can, try to write in a language that is just interesting to read. The more interesting, the better. Next, you can look at your organisation. Think about, from paragraph to paragraph, how well your text flows. Every paragraph should be a clear idea. Many sentences linked together, building the idea from its beginning to its conclusion, and then each paragraph linked together so that the whole piece of writing really feels like it flows. Think also about how you can use different sentence lengths to make your writing more interesting. If every sentence you use is very, very long, your writing will come across as very dull. Short, punchy sentences are sometimes very useful. And then finally, think about the language that you use. And here we're thinking in terms of vocabulary and grammar. So, first of all, think about the sort of mistakes that you make. A lot of students, especially here in Poland, make mistakes with articles. This is one of the most difficult areas of English grammar, I would say. And if you're not good at articles, then first of all, get more practice, and secondly, just get used to going back through your writing and looking for every single noun and considering whether you need no article, what we call the zero article, the indefinite article, a or an, or the definite article, the. Think about it for every single noun. Furthermore, do the mistakes you make stop the target reader from really understanding what you want to say? Sometimes a simple mistake will be just a slip, really. Something that you've misspelled, or something where you were thinking of something else and you wrote something. But if the target reader can't understand, or if the examiner can't understand the sentence that you've written, then that's quite a difficult mistake to get past. Think also about using a range of vocabulary and different forms of grammar. Most sentences follow a simple construction of subject, verb, object. I like football. for example. Think about ways of shaking that up a little bit, using different forms, maybe using inversion for emphasis, something like that. So let's have a little bit of a look at the different forms of writing that you'll meet in the exam. As I mentioned before, there's a big change with the CAE this year, and that's that the first part of the writing is now an essay. So you've been forewarned, spend some time getting used to writing essays. Do this as much as you can. The more practice you get at writing, the better you will be at writing. It's a very simple formula. So you'll be given a topic to write about, and you're given 3 points to consider. Of these, you have to choose 2 to actually discuss. So you don't need to really write about every single thing. It's very important that you read what we call the rubric, or the instructions for the task. Because if you miss that little point, you might write too much, go over the word limit, or simply get distracted. You also need to make an evaluation of kinds. It's not simply a descriptive piece of writing, showing the pros and cons of something. You have to say which, for example, is the most important thing. Okay, so have a look at the example from the Examiner's Handbook. If you haven't already taken a copy of this, have a look in the description at the bottom of this video for the link to the Cambridge website, and you'll be able to download the PDF. We're looking at sample paper 1. So let's focus on the content with this one. Let's think of some ways in which we can address the issues. So first of all, on your own, or if you've got somebody there watching the video with you, choose one of the points in the list and just develop it with your partner. Have a bit of a conversation with them about it. Describe the situation and then say why that option is the most important. And this will give you practice at evaluating and making a decision about something. If you can do this in a conversation, it's only a very small step from that conversation to being able to write things down. So let's have a look at the other writing types, and these are the kinds of writing that can appear in part 2 of the exam. Now, one of the other good things about the changed exam from 2015 is that Cambridge have vastly reduced the number of writing types that could appear. I think before 2015 there was something like 10 different writing types, and things like a letter of recommendation, an entry in an information sheet. There were just so many that it was very difficult to prepare for the exam. But the number of types has now been reduced. So for part 2, you'll have to choose from some of the following. You'll be given 3 options, and you can choose one of them to write. So you'll either do an email or a letter. It could be formal or informal. You might write a proposal, a review, or a report. So let's start by having a look at the report, since we have an example of this in the specifications PDF. With any writing type, and I'll make this point again and again, it's always worth repeating, you have to remember what the target reader wants. The person who actually is going to read this. Don't think of the examiner, think of the person who you're writing this for. And in the case of a report, this is probably your boss at work, a manager. They probably requested this information originally. They wanted you to write a report on a specific area. So make it very easy for the person reading it to get the information quickly. And how do we do that? Well, one way is to use headings. Think about the crucial pieces of information the target reader wants and create headings to direct their attention straight to them. Don't waste time on a long introduction. One sentence is really enough here, because remember, the manager you work for has asked you to write this report. They don't need a long preamble explaining the logic of writing the report or anything like that. They just want the report. And in terms of the difference between proposals and reports, reports are about the past. They're about an existing situation. For example, you have to describe and evaluate the facilities at a company, perhaps make a recommendation about what needs improving. Proposals are about the future. You propose something. For example, perhaps your manager has asked you to evaluate possible locations for the staff Christmas party. You have to suggest which one would be best and give a reason why. If your proposal doesn't include a strong recommendation for one point or another, it's not a good proposal. Reports don't always need a recommendation. Sometimes the rubric will request that you include one. So let's have a look at the example. You can pause here to read if you like. Let's consider organisation. How can you get a good mark for organising your particular report here? So again, if you've got a partner, have a look at the task and talk together. What headings are you going to use? How many paragraphs are you going to use? You don't have to have one paragraph per heading. You could have a heading followed by 2 paragraphs, as long as you remember that each paragraph should be the complete expression of one idea. So what will each paragraph contain? And then think about how you can vary sentence length. Let's have a look at the review next. Remember the target reader. Who is the target reader for a review? Well, somebody who wants to know about the particular item, product that you're talking about. So we read reviews of books to decide if it's worth buying that book and spending the time reading it. So think about how you will discuss the quality of the writing and how interesting the plot is, or if it's cliched and boring. But really be careful of spoiling the plot. Nobody wants to read a review that tells you everything that happens. Nobody wants to know, for example, for a movie review, that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. If you told somebody that before they went to see Empire Strikes Back, you probably wouldn't get very many thanks from people. So a review should really include your opinion or your recommendation. At the end of the review, it should be very clear to the reader whether or not you think this book is worth reading or buying. Try to strike a balance between being informative and being interesting. An informative review that's boring to read probably won't get read in the first place unless someone really can't decide for themselves whether or not to buy that book. Have a look at the example from the specifications PDF. So let's consider communicative achievement here. How can you get a good mark for this? Well, remember, this is about using the format to advantage and keeping the target reader as informed as possible. So first of all, think about ways to complete the task, writing a book review. And then I want you to think about how you would tell your friend about the book. Think about the interesting ways you would use to tell your friend whether or not you think the book was any good. Like I said before, if you can imagine having this as a conversation, you'll be able to very easily do this as a piece of writing. Okay, and the last one we're going to look at from the specifications PDF is the email. And again, with any writing type, remember the target reader. Here, they want a reply to their email. The rubric will include a short email that you received to which you have to respond. If you don't answer all the questions that you have been asked, you haven't really succeeded at writing an email. So it's very important that you go through and just highlight every question that's in the rubric, so that at the end of your writing you can be sure to have answered everything. Also, try to treat the person you're writing to as a person, not as an object or a thing. If you're writing an informal email, remember that they're probably your friend. Don't start your email with something like, "Pursuant to the email I received on the 14th of this month," blah blah blah. That would be horrible. However, you could start with a nice little excuse or an apology for not having written sooner. One of my students a few years ago apologized for not having written because they had broken both wrists playing squash, I think it was. Now, it's not particularly relevant, but you could spend a sentence or two doing this just to add a bit of character to your email, but also to pick up some easy credit, really, for using more sophisticated language. So have a look at the example. And we'll focus on language this time. How can you get a good mark for the language you use in an email? Well, first of all, look at the task and think about the things you have to write about. Highlight the questions you must respond to. And then for each point, on your own or with a partner, think of a great expression you can use to talk about this point. And think of a few different grammatical structures you can use as well. You can use rhetorical questions. You could say, have you ever done this? Well, in that case, you really ought to do this. It's a lot more interesting than simply saying, you should do this. So let's have a quick summary just to go through some of the points that often people ask about for the writing paper. First of all, please just don't waste your time reading through your writing and counting how many words you've written. There's no need to do that. The examiners won't do that. The examiners who assess your writing will have looked at so many pieces that they'll just know how long 220 to 260 words should be. They'll know this. And you should too. With a bit of practice, you'll start to get a real feel for it. This is also why I think when you practice, you should write your essays and your articles and your reports and things like that. You should write these things on paper by hand. If you do it on a computer, first of all, you get used to typing and you can't type in the exam. But also, you don't learn how long your writing is, how long 250 words or so takes up on a piece of paper. For some of you, this could even be 2 sides of writing, especially if you double space. So what you should do instead, when you know how much you've written, when you've learned that, go back through your piece of writing and look for the mistakes that you typically make, especially with articles. And again, if you've double spaced your writing, you could replace some of the words or expressions with more sophisticated ones. If you wrote that something was quite good, you could say later instead that it was extraordinarily brilliant. Another reminder to say, just remember who you're writing for. If you always keep them in mind, your writing will be a lot better. Also remember that the truth itself is just not important. If you can't think of a book to review, just invent one. The examiners are not going to sit there looking through your writing, fact-checking everything in Google. If you say that, for example, Dumbledore was Harry Potter's brother, as long as you don't cause any miscommunication with your grammar, the examiners can't really complain about it. They only want to see evidence of good English, not of facts. And finally, just use every resource that you have available to you. You've got a PDF with you right now, which has an example of the writing paper, but it has more than that. It has examples of pieces of writing that students have written, followed by their grades. So you can have a look through these and start to see what it is the examiners are looking for. How severely do they treat mistakes? Do you end up with a mark of 1 for language if you make consistent errors with your articles, or can you still scrape a 2 or a 3? Have a look and start to get a feel for it. And the same is in the case of the exam practice books that a lot of people have access to. These also include some great examples of students' own writing and the grading that the examiners have given them. Okay, well I hope that was all useful to you. If you have any questions about the writing, get in touch with me, leave a comment below, and I'll try and get back to you. Thank you very much.